Good morning, everyone. If you are not speaking, can you please go ahead and mute yourself?
Good morning, everyone.
And we will get started. All right, good morning, folks. If you have not already, please go ahead and mute yourself and we will proceed with the meeting. We're going to be going over how to get oriented with GoToMeeting if you haven't ever used it before. The mute, the camera, the share screen, all that stuff is at the bottom. And also you can put comments or questions in the upper right-hand corner in the chat section. If you would like to give a public comment during this meeting, please sign into the Google form, which is linked in that chat section. You can put your name, sign in, and then let us know whether or not you would like to make a public comment. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to pass this over to Kendall, who will be taking roll call.
Good morning, everybody. All right, we'll go ahead and start with roll this morning. Tim Andrus.
Present.
Ray Chavez.
Present.
Okay, thank you. Will Conley. Kurt Campbell.
Here.
Thank you. Charlie Flatten.
Present.
Thank you. Vic Hildebrand.
Here.
Thank you. Thomas Youngman. Russell Labus.
Here.
Thank you. Glenn Lord.
Present.
Thank you. Daniel Meyer.
Here.
Thank you. Gary Middleton. John Byram.
Here.
Thank you. Kevin Pattinson.
Jonathan Stinson for Kevin Pattison.
Thank you, Jonathan. Robert Puente.
Here.
Thank you. Humberto Ramos. Steve Ramsey. Weldon Riggs. Roland Ruiz.
Here.
Thank you. I believe we have an alternate for Miss Diane Savage.
Lane Shorp is here.
Thank you, sir. Steve Graham.
Here.
Thank you. Mitchell Sowards.
Present.
Thank you. Heather Sumter.
Here.
Thank you. Tom Taggart.
Here.
Thank you. Ian Taylor.
Good morning, I'm here.
Thank you. Diane Wassench.
I'm here.
Thank you. Adam Yablonsky.
Here.
Thank you. Now, Marty Kelly.
Kelly
Russ-
Kowal, sitting in for Marty Kelly.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Rusty Ray. Ronald Fiesler. Ileana Delgado. Don McGee. Elizabeth McCoy.
Here.
Thank you. Charles Wiedenfield. Jamie McCool. Carl Krull. Okay, thank you very much. I will turn it back over to our next agenda item.
This is Mr. Ramos. I just want to make sure you got me because I was trying to call in as well.
Yes, sir, Mr. Ramos, I have you now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kendall.
Okay, so. What? So confirm we have a quorum, please.
Yes, sir, we have a quorum.
Very fine. And one other matter, let me make sure we're recording this meeting, correct?
That is correct.
All right. With that, let's move to agenda item 2, public comment. Did we receive any notification that individuals wanted to make public comment at this time?
No, sir, no such indication.
Okay. Is there anyone present on the meeting that would like to make public comment but did not register such? Okay. There'll be another opportunity at the end of the meeting to provide public comment should you want to do so. With that, we'll move to agenda item 3, approval of minutes of previous meeting of the planning group. I believe everyone received a copy of the minutes prior to the meeting and hopefully had an opportunity to review those minutes. Are there any comments, discussions, or corrections identified that need to be addressed?
Mr. Chairman, this is Robert Point. I have a question about the minutes.
Yes, sir.
And I'm not sure if the minutes are just a representation of what happened, and if what happened was incorrect, do we just repeat what happened incorrectly in the minutes? And I'll get specific if you'd like me to.
I think that'd be useful if you get specific.
Agenda item number 10, which is the solicitation of the technical consultant. The second sentence says, holding this process in open meetings would be subject to the Open Meetings Act. That's incorrect. But if that's what was said at the meeting, then that statement is correct that it was said at the meeting, but the statement itself is incorrect. So I don't know if this requires a correction of the minutes or we just let it go as that.
That's a good point. I My understanding of the intent of the minutes of this planning group is to record the discussions and actions that occurred during the meeting. I can't recall that was said or not said. I think it was generally discussed. I think, well, it's my.
So I'm happy to let it go with just the understanding that the minutes are repeating essentially.
A number of, I think the intent of all that was to point out that planning group members that exceeded quorum, I said that process it would require. I'm sorry?
You're correct. So it doesn't say that specifically. So that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yes, sir. Understood.
So
well,
subject,
I suppose if it's yes, sir, Mr. Puente, go ahead.
Subject to that, I would be happy to have the meetings approved.
Well, and so it sounds as though should we record and document in the minutes of this meeting that you've identified this issue, would that be sufficient if we proceeded with the adoption of the minutes?
It sure would. Thank you.
Very good. Any other comments or discussion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Tom Taggart. I will be abstaining on voting on that since I wasn't present at the last meeting.
Very fine. Any other comments, discussions?
Just this is Mr. Lord. Just to be clear, though, we will if what is documented there is incorrect, we will document the correction in this meeting's minutes. Correct?
So, Glenn, I think that's sort of the whole question being asked is whether or not the minutes reflect what was discussed, stated, and considered during the meeting, whether it's accurate or inaccurate, versus making some sort of correction to false statements or something to that effect. What I'm proposing is that we clarify this matter in the minutes for this meeting, that an apparent inaccuracy in the discussion was identified under agenda item 10. But unless someone has some recollection that was not actually discussed as recorded in the draft minutes for the previous meeting, we proceed with the adoption of those minutes. So yes, there would be some record that this issue has been raised and recorded in future minutes.
Tim, may I ask a question, please?
Sure.
So can you please, Mr. Puente, provide clarification as to what the correction is?
The words that are in this minute says holding this process. First of all, there's no identification of what that process is. And open meetings would be subject to the Open Meetings Act. That is incorrect. It's only subject to the Open Meetings Act if you have a certain number of individuals in the meeting.
Correct.
Whatever you're discussing, whether it's procurement, whether it's any subject at all, it's subject to the Open Meetings Act, depending on the number of individuals that are in that meeting.
Okay, so you're requesting that the specifics of that is just added into these minutes.
Well, if you add that kind of language in there, it'll make that sentence correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Puente.
And this is Adam, and if it's worth anything, that is detail that I remember being discussed at our last meeting, so I think it makes sense to put it in with the minutes.
Thank you. We will add that in.
Yeah, and this is Glenn again. I just want to make sure that we're not following an inappropriate process going forward, and that's why I'm kind of saying about the correction. So I'm okay with what the chair has proposed and what Mr. Puente has agreed to. I just, I think those clarifications are important, and I just want to make sure that we're following the right rules going forward.
Thank you, Glenn. Good comments. Is there any objection to amending the draft minutes to include a clarification regarding the write-up within the minutes about the process in open meetings as described, I think, in paragraph 1? Is there any issue with amending that in the draft minutes prior to approval?
Mr. Chairman, this is John Byram, Noise River Authority. I move that we do amend the draft minutes to reflect that change.
Very fine. And with that amendment, are you proposing the adoption of the amended draft minutes?
Yes, sir. Sorry.
Very, very fine. Just want we'll be clear here. Okay, so we have a motion to adopt the amended draft minutes.
Mr. Chair,
Second to the motion.
this is Weldon Riggs. I second the motion as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Riggs. We have we'll adopt this by consensus. If you oppose the adoption of the motion, please speak up so we know there's no longer consensus. Okay, we'll consider the motion passed by consensus. With that, we'll move to agenda item 4, status reports and communication by Texas Water Development Board. I believe Ms. McCoy is going to provide a presentation and comments.
Hi, good morning. This is Elizabeth McCoy with the Water Development Board. I do have a few brief updates for you this morning. Let me turn my camera on. All right, hi, good morning. The regional and state water planning rules pamphlet and public notice quick reference documents have been updated to reflect the recently revised rules that became effective in May. And these documents are now available on the 6-cycle planning webpage. The 6-cycle planning contracts have been sent out to the planning group administrators for execution, and the deadline for execution is August 31st. And I do believe the Region L contract has been fully executed at this point. The 2022 State Water Plan was adopted in July, and the plan's available on the TWDB website at the link that's provided on the slide. On this webpage, you can also find a link to the interactive State Water Plan, as well as regional summaries of the 2021 regional water plans that we've prepared for each of the 16 regions. The inaugural Interregional Planning Council dissolved upon adoption of the 2022 State Water Plan. So coming up, we will be soliciting nominations from the planning groups for representatives to serve on the next council, and the new council will serve until adoption of the 2027 State Water Plan. Next slide, please. And so finally, I'd like to provide a brief legislative update. There was a bill that passed in the regular session that will result in some changes to the regional water planning process. House Bill 1907 relieves the planning groups from assessing the financing needs to implement water management strategies and projects, and it removes the requirement to submit the infrastructure financing report to the TWDB. The bill also relieves SWIFT program applicants from submitting the infrastructure financing survey with their applications for financial assistance. And then lastly, the bill also relieves planning groups from prioritizing projects within their regional plans, and it eliminates the need for the Uniform Standards Stakeholder Committee, which is related to that prioritization process. This bill goes into effect on September 1st, and we anticipate conducting a rulemaking later this year to implement this legislation. And that is all of the updates I have for you this morning, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Any questions?
Elizabeth, this is Tim Andrus. Would you confirm for me that while we're being relieved of the need to prioritize projects and strategies, we'll continue to identify strategies as either recommended or alternate?
Yes,
we'll
that's
no
correct.
longer do that organization of all those strategies in sequence of highest priority to lowest priority.
Yes, that's correct.
Are there other comments or questions? Okay. There being none, we'll move to agenda item 5, status reports and communications related to regional water planning, including reports from the chair, regional liaison, groundwater management area representatives, and individual members of the planning group. I'll begin this matter with a chair report. Many of the items I intended to report on have been just discussed by Texas Water Development Board representatives. I would encourage everyone, though, to go to their website and view the online interactive state water plan website. It's excellent. In years past, I certainly had difficulty getting to information that I was interested in. That's no longer the case. It's very user-friendly. So good job to Texas Water Development Board. I wanted to update the membership that on June 15, Mr. Sengelman resigned from Region L. He'll no longer serve on the committee. We'll be, of course, addressing vacancies at an agenda item further and down on the list, but I wanted everyone to know that he has resigned. Let's see. It may be helpful, I'll point it out for the members. Texas Water Development Board sends out newsletters regarding the planning process. The last one was sent out on July 15th. It was addressed to all planning group members, so if you're not receiving that, I'd encourage you to contact Kendall so that your email address can be relayed on to TWDB. And that's an excellent newsletter. I'd encourage everyone to take advantage of that. And then finally, we'll get to this matter. I've already touched on it a little bit. On the 29th of July, the executive committee held a meeting to review nominations to fill vacancies on the planning group. During that meeting, we were able to reach agreement on a recommendation, and we'll bring that forward to the group at a agenda item further down on the list. As far as liaison reports, I can report on Region P. I attended their most recent meeting. Much like we are doing, they're going through the initial steps of organizing for this planning cycle. At that meeting, they had not yet selected a technical consultant, although that may have been resolved in the interim. Yeah, and of course, I guess the only other thing to report is their next meeting will be on August 23rd, and I'll participate in that meeting as well. Then my final set of comments has to do with groundwater management area 15. On April 8th, the representatives proposed a desired future condition for adoption. The public comment period on that proposed DFC for adoption opened on May 4. That's a public comment period that must be at least 90 days in length. Individual districts should be holding hearings on the matter, accepting public input, and prior to the next meeting of GMA 15, which is scheduled for October, each of those member GCDs will submit a summary report for review and consideration by the planning group. That's all I have to report. Are there any other reports individual members would like to make, or liaisons to other groups, etc.? Okay.
Tim, this is Diane Wasenick. I am the liaison for Region K, and I attended their meeting remotely recently. And like others, like us, they're going through the initial steps. But I was extremely surprised to see a spirited and long discussion about opening up a position where someone had resigned on the board or committee to the public. It appeared that some thought it should simply be appointed by the members, the stakeholders. And I tried to follow the reasoning behind that. It was the public interest group person. One of them was, I think there was another one as well. And because I was a new liaison and they knew I was on the call, some people asked me to comment on how our process works. And so I explained to them that I was the public interest representative and that that was opened up when that position became available, when someone retired, and that all the League of Women Voters groups in our region nominated me, and that is how we handle vacancies. It is not just appointed by the group among people they know. It is opened up to the public in all ways. But I really couldn't remember exactly how we open it up. I know we send the nomination forms to our own stakeholders, and I assume we send the nomination forms when a vacancy comes up to the entities which have a representative in the regional. But I wasn't positive, so I didn't state that for a fact. I thought maybe we could talk about that today when we're in the nomination process.
Thank you, Diane. Good comments, and sure, we can include that as part of our discussion regarding vacancies. Any other reports or comments to be made by members at this time? Okay. Thank you. We'll move to agenda item 6, which I think we essentially have 2 matters to deal with under agenda item 6. Pre-planning public input, and then subsequent to that, a discussion regarding interregional coordination. Kendall, I believe you have a presentation developed for this, and we'll carry the discussion from here.
Yes, sir. Okay. So the purpose of the pre-planning public input meeting is not only to provide a quick background of the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group to any members of the public that have been invited to participate with us today, but to also provide an opportunity for members of the public to come forward and identify community priorities for the 2026 Regional Water Plan. Now, just giving a quick overview, in June of 1997, Governor George W. Bush signed into law Senate Bill 1, which created the regional water planning process. The Texas Water Development Board is the lead state agency for coordinating that regional water planning process and developing a comprehensive state water plan. Region L itself is comprised of 21 counties with 32 voting member seats from 12 interest groups. Now, the purpose of the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group is to provide comprehensive regional water plans and carry out the responsibilities assigned to it by state law. The biggest of the responsibilities is the development of the regional water plan for this planning area for Region L. The plan identifies both short and long-term supply needs and recommends water management strategies to address those needs. Now, the plan is updated every 5 years, and we are at the beginning of the 6th planning cycle. Texas Water Development Board will gather all of the 16 regional water plans and then augments a statewide water plan, the most recent of which, as Elizabeth just mentioned, was adopted earlier this month. Now, per Texas Water Development Board's requirements, we have invited members of the public to join us in today's meeting. Invitations were sent to neighboring regional water planning groups, municipalities, counties, river authorities, public utilities, and those who hold water rights for the use of surface water throughout Region L. So at this time, I want to open the floor for public input and ask if anyone from the public wants to make a comment regarding any issues that need to be addressed or provisions that need to be included in the 2026 Regional Water Plan. Please remember to unmute yourselves and provide any updates or public input now. Okay, before we move on, I'll ask one more time, are there any members from the public that have specific issues they would like to be addressed in the regional water plan?
Kendall, this is Tim Andrews. If we receive no public comment at this point and we move on and ultimately adjourn from this meeting, will that conclude the specific opportunity to provide public comment as part of the pre-planning process, or is there still an opportunity after that?
They will have an opportunity at the end of the meeting with the regular public comment section, but that will then conclude.
Very good.
All right, with that, I will move on to the second requirement for the meeting. Texas Water Development Board, as Elizabeth mentioned, had an interregional planning council that requested that each regional water plan group assess strategies to coordinate with other regional water planning groups. Currently, we are using one of the suggested strategies here by having interregional liaisons that attend meetings and report back to Region L. Other options include forming a committee to meet with neighboring regional water planning groups, or authorizing consultants to meet with other regional water planning groups, but our current strategy is already approved. So at this time, I want to open the floor to a deliberate discussion amongst planning group members. Has the strategy worked for us, and would you like to continue with the strategy of using interregional liaisons?
Kendall, this is Tim Andrews. In previous cycles, I believe it's accurate to say that our technical consultants have gone to substantial lengths to coordinate with other planning groups when there would be potential or perceived conflicts associated with water use from another region as part of a strategy in Region L, or the converse, where water is used in a strategy in another planning group organization. You know, I know we're sensitive, or we will need to be sensitive to costs associated with this planning cycle and tasks assigned to consultants. Is there additional funding provided for this by TWDB to complete this work and requirement?
Hi, Tim. This is Elizabeth McCoy. Right now, this interregional kind of coordination would be done within the existing kind of scope and funding that's available.
Okay. Okay. So at present, our expectation is that the liaisons to the various other planning groups, which we have one designated for each planning group, I understand, we're asking them to engage consistently and not only report to those planning groups, you know, the activities being undertaken by this group, but then conversely report back to our planning group what they've learned at those meetings, correct? That's the strategy that's in place presently and approved by TWDB as well.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct? Okay.
Hey, Tim, I'll just add that, you know, whatever strategy the planning group thinks is most appropriate, you know, for conducting this interregional coordination is fine by the TWDB. We provided some examples, but there's not a process for kind of approving what you're going through right now.
Very fine. It's my understanding that we'll be required as a planning group to essentially document and record the activities that we undertake for this purpose as part of technical memorandums, the initially prepared plan, and then finally the regional water planning. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, very fine.
Mr.
Is there any
Chairman,
other comments or suggestions? Yes,
I would like to ask Elizabeth a question, if I might, in relation to this item.
certainly.
Elizabeth, to your knowledge, I mean, in relation to the intercoordination of the different regions, has the Texas Water Development Board, in reviewing the submittals from all 16 regions, in relation to our region, have they identified any deficiencies in relation to the coordination or any problems that have arisen that were not resolved prior to our approving the draft and sending it to them?
Hi, no, we haven't evaluated that specifically, but I can kind of give you a little bit more background about this item. So this discussion of interregional coordination is a new requirement for the pre-planning meeting this cycle. And it was kind of recommended by the Interregional Planning Council, who during their meetings and kind of development of their recommendations for the report that they submitted to the board last year, they identified a need for planning groups to coordinate potentially with other regions earlier in the planning cycle rather than kind of just at the end of the cycle. So this discussion item provides an opportunity for the planning group to kind of consider how they want to do that at the beginning of the cycle.
Thank you.
Well, I have this, Tim Andrews. I have a couple of suggestions to help further our discussion, maybe come up with a process for ensuring we deal with this matter. I would suggest that on future agendas, we place an item specifically related to interregional coordination, at least on all future regular meeting agendas. I'd also like for the planning group to request a list of those strategies in the 2021 regional plan that rely on water from another region, and vice versa. Any strategies we have that any strategies we have that rely on water from another region, or any strategies from another region that rely on water from within our boundary, if those lists could be provided, and then we submit those to the liaison so that they're aware of those. And then, of course, with the hopes being that we'll receive reports, at least verbally, at future meetings from the liaison, so that we can incorporate that into the minutes and then ultimately make that part of our documentation process for the various plans and memorandums.
I'd like to back you up on that, Tim. I think that's a good idea so that we, the liaisons, know what's going on early on. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you,
And Tim, we do have that information available and we provided it to the planning groups, but I'm happy to get that to you again for discussion.
Well, if it's already been provided, whomever provides it, it's immaterial. I just hope that our liaisons would have access to it and know which of those strategies apply to the planning groups that they're coordinating with. Just to give them something to work with. Of course, we don't know how other planning groups will handle this matter, so perhaps that's a good start. I think we should also be open to the possibility, and in fact, I think it's a likelihood that we'll need the technical consultants to engage in this as we develop strategies, etc. So unless there's any objection to proceeding in that way, that's what we'll do, incorporate the agenda item on future agendas, etc.
Tim, this is Diane again, and I would like to know if TWDB has provided that to us. Do you mean in the plan somewhere on the website, or how was this provided to us? I'm happy to look it up. Just tell me where. It seems to me if we're in the very beginning of a new plan, there may be projects that nobody has told us about yet.
Hi, Diane. So we provided two spreadsheets, and one of them is the recommended water management strategies from the 2021 regional water plan. So it's looking back at the previous plan, and it's a list of the strategies that were kind of interregional. So they provided, you know, the source of water was in another region, or they were providing water to another region. And I believe we have that on the 6th cycle planning website, but it was sent out via email, but I'm happy to send that out again as needed.
I can look it up on the website. I just needed to know where. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Is there any additional discussion under this agenda item? Okay. So with that, we'll move forward to agenda item 7, discussion and appropriate action regarding recommendation by the executive committee on vacancies to the planning group for terms expiring in August 2021, or vacancies resulting from resignation, I suppose. Let's see here.
Tim, if I could hop in right here, I want to answer
Sure, please.
Diane's question that she had at the beginning. So our process for this, if you'll remember, at the last meeting, the planning group amended our requirements and our bylaws for how we move forward and solicit nominations for these vacancies. Our team posted public notices on our websites, on all relevant websites, and sent an email with this notice to each county clerk within each county in our region. We also have sent it out to the planning group multiple times because, as I've learned in my time here, the water world in Texas is actually pretty small. So we really rely on y'all to kind of disseminate this information and spread the word because y'all have all the connections. So that's where we received the majority of our nomination forms from.
Thank you.
Okay, so we presently have, correct me if I get any of these numbers wrong, please, Caitlin, Kendall, 15 vacancies within the group. Those are broken down by 2 vacancies under the agricultural interest group, 1 under counties, 1 under electrical generating utilities, 2 under the environmental interest group, 1 under industrial, 3 under municipalities, 1 under river authorities, 1 under small business, 2 under water districts, and 1 under water utilities. And okay, very fine. We have a chart to assist us with that. Yeah, so the slide on the screen identifies the various nominated individuals for the various interest groups. A couple of comments on that before we get into any sort of recommendation. We still continue to have vacancies associated with counties and electrical generating utilities. And then under municipalities, it's the one instance in which we had more nominations than vacancies. In addition, I should point out a number of those nominated individuals would be not new to anyone on this group, but certainly new to the planning group. We can discuss that in more detail. But like I had mentioned earlier, on the 29th of July, we held the meeting. The executive committee held a meeting. During that meeting, we reviewed and discussed the nominations. The recommendation of the executive group is fairly simple, that we recommend filling the vacancies of those interest groups without any, let's say, contested nominations, or nominations that don't exceed the number of vacancies, to fill those vacancies with those nominated individuals. They're all qualified and certainly would be assets to the planning group. With regard to municipalities, we reviewed and discussed the nominated individuals, and it's the recommendation of the executive group that those vacancies be filled with the incumbents, Mr. Taggart, Mr. Puente, Mr. Middleton. The fourth nominated individual, Mr. Pruski, well qualified, and I talked to him about his nomination. Very interested in serving, and I suspect he'll be. Well, I certainly hope he'll continue to participate, and I encouraged him to possibly find the opportunity to serve as an alternate as well. I made it clear to him that it's not that we weren't interested, very much are, but you know, the other nominees would be recommended. I guess that sums up the recommendation. I don't know if any of the other executive committee members want to make any comments. Would like to provide them that opportunity, and then if there are none from the executive committee, we'll open it to the floor for discussion.
Mr. Chairman, this is Weldon Riggs.
Yes, sir.
I would move to accept the executive committee's recommendations for positions on the Region L with the acceptance of Tom Taggart, Gary Middleton, and Robert Puente in the municipality's interest group.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Riggs. Before we move on to a second and a vote, I want to make sure there's plenty of opportunity for any discussion. So let's at least pause for a moment, give any individuals interested in discussing it that opportunity.
Mr. Chairman, this is Robert Puente.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Am I correct? Did you say earlier that at a subsequent meeting, we will look at nominations for other vacancies?
Well, while I didn't say that, we still have vacancies. So yes, I would assume we would continue with our solicitation of nominations for those vacant interest groups.
Okay. So I would ask that at the subsequent meeting and the subsequent agenda item, that Sarah be more explicit in the notice to the public in the agenda, where it will state exactly what interest groups are vacant and which ones we're going to fill, including the names of the individuals that the executive committee has recommended be filled. Because right now the public has no idea, looking at item number 7, as to what vacancies are open, what members are whose terms are up. There's not really adequate notice on agenda item 7. So for the next meeting, I hope that they would be directed to include that information.
Hello, Mr. Puente. I'd just like to clarify on that. On each of the notices that we've sent out, it has the full list of vacancies that we are soliciting for. We want to open it in as large a way as possible so folks who don't know about our process but are learning about it can come in and get that information. Our concern with showing who is incumbent and returning is that folks will shy away from joining. We want to let the public know that it is their opportunity to try and participate in this committee if they wish to.
Well, I appreciate that, but I think it is more important for the general public to know on the notices that are given to the public for their comment, whether they're shy about applying or not, of what we're going to be talking about, because that is the key. If the key is being open and transparent, when we have an agenda item that simply says there's vacancies, the public has no idea what we're talking
about. Okay, so Mr. Puente, Tim Andrus. So I believe the agenda item reads, discussion appropriate action regarding recommendation by the executive committee on vacancies of the South Central Texas Regional Planning Group voting members' terms expiring August 2021. You think that's inadequate for discussion and action on this matter?
I'm not saying that specifically. I think it barely meets the requirements. I think it would be a better practice for the public to know exactly what we're talking about. And we're going to be talking, today we're talking about certain ones that we are filling, and I appreciate everybody that is going to allow me to serve again if the membership so chooses. But I think the public in general should know specifically what we're going to be discussing. So for the next agenda item, in our next meeting, I would ask that the item be more specific as to what the vacancies are and who we are recommending to appoint. Because the public, again, has the right to come in front of us and say they agree, they don't agree, they agree with the process, they don't agree with the process. That is their right.
Tim, this is Diane Wasenick. May I comment?
Absolutely.
I want, I do understand what Mr. Puente is saying, and I am wondering, I searched myself on the website for Region L to see if we had a list of who was a stakeholder and when their term was up and who they represented. And I did not see that. Are we, am I just overlooking that? Is it on there? And if it's not, that would help a lot. If the public saw that there were terms expiring, they could go to the website and see where.
Hi, Diane. That's a great idea. We have a list of all of our members and their interest categories, but not the term limits. So we will definitely add that in.
Thank you.
Very good.
Mr. Chairman, this is John Barham. I noticed that there were 4 of the applicants that did not designate which area they were to represent. How did the board handle that? Did they just assign a area, or how was it handled?
When you say area, are you referring to interest group?
Interest group, yes, sir.
They either addressed their desired interest group directly to Caitlin or myself, and we were able to apply that to the application, or it was stated later in the application if a box wasn't checked.
Tim?
Yes.
The only comment I would make is in relation to when we get to a point of vote and accord with the bylaws, I'll vote on all the categories except the interest group that I'm nominated in accord with, that restriction in the bylaws.
Thanks,
Tom. So I'll be abstaining on the municipal group.
Very fine. Are there any other comments?
This is Mr. Ramos. Hearing no other comments, I'll second Mr. Riggs' recommendation.
Okay. Is it acceptable to the group in order to deal with and provide the opportunity for members to abstain where they feel they need to, that we go through the recommendation and confirm there's consensus by interest group? Is there any objection to that approach? Okay.
No.
All right. They're hearing no objection to that. We'll walk through it in this way. Unless there's objection, we'll consider the nominees for the agricultural interest group to be appointed to fill the vacancies. The nominees are Mr. Riggs and Mr. Yablonsky. Any objection to that? Hearing none, we'll consider that adopted by consensus. For the environmental interest group, we have the nominees Mr. Flatten and Ms. Puig Williams. Is there any objection to those nominees filling the vacancies? Hearing none, we'll consider those vacancies filled by consensus. Regarding the industries interest group, we have a nomination, Mr. Chavez. Any objection to filling that vacancy with the nominee? Hearing none, we'll consider that adopted by consensus. The nomination regarding municipalities interest group is Mr. Taggart, Mr. Puente, and Mr. Middleton. Is there any objection to filling those vacancies with those nominees?
I object. John Barham.
Okay.
Tim, that was not part of the motion. That one, the municipalities was left out of the original motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood the motion. Excuse me. Well, thank you for pointing that out. I suppose we'll.
Mr.
we'll go-
Andrews, this
Yes.
is Riggs. That was part of my motion, with the acceptance of Tom Taggart, Gary Middleton, and Robert Puente in the municipality's interest group. That was part of my motion. Maybe it didn't sound that way, but the acceptance of.
Thank you, Mr. Riggs. That's good qualification. Qualifying that and clarifying that, does that resolve the objection to filling the vacancies for the municipal interest group with the 3 nominees? Mr. Byron, was that your objection?
No, my objection is I feel like the smaller communities need a voice on this. Certainly have no problem with Mr. Taggart, Mr. Puente, and Mr. Middleton. They are very experienced members of the group and been there for a long time and done a great job. But I just feel like that the smaller cities need a voice.
Okay. Well, let's set that aside for the moment. Let's see if there's any other issues to be identified and see if we can't come to consensus. And if not, we'll proceed with a vote. Regarding River Authority interest groups, we have the nomination of Mr. Stinson. Is there any objection to the nominee filling the vacancy? Okay, we'll consider there to be consensus, at least on that portion of the motion. Regarding small business interest groups, any objection to Mr. Simmons filling the vacancy? Okay, we'll indicate we have consensus on that interest group. Water districts, Mr. Lavis and Ms. Farmer, any objection to those nominees filling the vacancies? Okay, we'll consider that one to have consensus. And then regarding water utility interest groups, Ms. Beard, any objection to the nominee filling the vacancy? Okay, hearing none, we'll assume there's consensus on that matter as well, leaving us with the issue of how to fill the municipality interest groups. So it's been some time since we've discussed the idea of consensus or taking action and improving action by consensus. And I'll just take this opportunity to point out it's over time many of us have had to agree to move on with the process and accept decisions that we didn't completely agree with, but could ultimately live with, so that the work of the group continued. So with that in mind, Mr. Byram, is it fair to say that you can't come to that position where you can accept it, although you expressed your reservations that small municipality interest groups may not have adequate representation? And if you cannot, then I will proceed to a vote on the matter.
Chairman Anderson, what I would ask is that in the future we consider, in order to put this to rest, I would ask that we consider the rural areas a little more with some of the future areas of interest that we're going to fill. Okay. Maybe try to get some of that participation, because certainly you've got qualified people, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just feel like that. Yes. There's some people that feel like they're left out of this process, and I would like to see if we could incorporate that.
Yeah.
Good comments. I agree, and in my discussion with Mr. Pruski, he expressed frustration on behalf of small communities and the process. Again, part of the purpose of encouraging him to participate. But I think we'll continue to make strong efforts to reach out to those small communities during the planning process.
Thank you, sir.
Tim, this is Diane Wasenick, and I want to comment that I don't know Mr. Pruski or where he's from, but there is, there are other openings that are popping up. You had a resignation and the county position is still open. And the reason we had Goliad County represented in the county position was that we wanted a more well-rounded Region L stakeholder group, and we did try to emphasize counties that didn't have anyone else represented from their area, Goliad being what I would call a rural county. And so when we didn't hear from them or from anyone on the county positions, I called the Goliad County judge myself and got his assistant. He was out that day. And at that point, there was only 24 hours before the deadline to apply or nominate. And his assistant said that they had not heard a thing about it. So I guess the county clerk doesn't know to give them that info. And I guess the representative from Goliad County didn't tell them either. And so I think they just couldn't find somebody in 24 hours. And I'm glad they're going to get another chance, because that means another rural applicant might be able to apply. So I don't know about Mr. Pruski, if his county judge wants him to be on this, he could nominate someone for that position, and there may be others. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Good comments, and I'm sure the membership will reach out to people they know that might be interested in filling those other interest groups and encourage them to apply, whether they be from rural communities or urban communities. So with all of that said, at this point, I believe we have consensus on filling the vacancies with the nominees recommended by the executive committee. If that is not the case, please speak up now. Okay. Hearing no objection, we'll consider those vacancies filled with the nominees identified. I think our normal practice has been, at least when we meet in person, those individuals filling the vacancies would take a seat at the table and so on. Can't quite do that today, but for all of those nominees that are present on the call, please consider yourself part of the committee, participate in the discussion as you see appropriate, and I think you'll receive some communication from Sarah's staff regarding some requirements you have to complete regarding open government training, things like that. I had received a question from Mr. Simmons regarding having an alternate, and so while I explain that to Mr. Simmons, I'll take an opportunity to mention it to all the new members. We do allow for the designation of alternate representatives for your position. I think there may be some condition, perhaps that they complete the open government training, something to that effect, but know that you can designate an alternate and relay that information to the administrator, and they can participate in the meeting on your behalf. I believe we'll also send you a copy of the bylaws. If you haven't already downloaded those, you can look at those and verse yourself on the particulars of those. Is there any other discussion or questions, comments? I suppose the last comment will be for all the new members, when we next meet in person, we'll certainly give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to the membership so that you can get to know your fellow members and start getting integrated with the group. If there's no other discussion on that matter, we'll move to agenda item 8. Discussion and appropriate action regarding the recommendation of a technical consultant firm to the Regional Water Planning Group for the 2026 Regional Water Plan. Kendall, I believe you're going to begin the discussion on this matter.
Hey, Tim, I'm going to go ahead and hop in on this. I just would like to provide some background context before we go ahead and get started. So at the last planning group meeting, the planning committee voted to follow a process set by the River Authority, which was so the Texas Water Development Board, in our contract with them, has asked that river authorities or the administrator follow your procurement process in the effort to find a technical consultant for the planning group committee. So the River Authority technical process was the one that this planning group voted on and approved to follow. You nominated 3 folks from the planning group committee: John Byram, Charlie Flatten, and Humberto Ramos. Those served on the committee and have been extremely involved in every single step of the process. And now we'd like to invite Charlie Flatten to give the group's recommendation to the planning group. I'd also like to note that our staff and our legal staff are here to answer any process questions that folks may have, and any selection questions Charlie or other members of the committee can answer. Mr. Flatten, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to compliment just every aspect of this process. I was very impressed with staff at SARA, and I was also, and the group was also very impressed with the applicants that applied for this position. We went through a very thorough administrative process. The selection process was professional. All committee members were present at all times and studied the materials and had insights to offer. All that has been documented, and I'll rely on SARA staff to give the specifics of those. Via multiple meetings that were really well managed, the applicants were given the opportunity to submit detailed proposals, and in addition to being given the opportunity to make presentations in person / virtually, that is. The committee found both applicants to be outstanding in every way. I can't really say enough about how prepared they were, how ably they expressed their desire to guide this process through, and the margin that separated them on the final vote was very, very slim. So I would congratulate them both, though we only had a place for one consultant. The finding of the committee was for the Black and Veatch team, and that finding was unanimous throughout the committee.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, Charlie. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I would like to be recognized on a motion to cease any more discussion on this matter and move it to another meeting because of the inadequate notice to the public, and just as important, an inadequate notice to the Region L members as to what that recommendation is. In other words, right this very minute, as soon as Charlie mentioned the words Black and Veatch, I am going to be asked to vote up or down on that entity to serve as our next technical consultant, which is probably the most important vote that we as a membership take, because they are so important for the work that we do. When you read agenda item 8, the public has no idea who we're even going to debate. We have no idea right now. Charlie said that the margin was very, very slim. And when it's very, very slim, I think the membership of Region L deserves the right to know how slim, how close was second, who the SNWB members were, what made it so close. All these details are very important for us to know. The last time we did this, we actually had an open process where the entities came in and were interviewed by all the Region L committee. and therefore the public got to see this interview also. And I would ask that we go through that process again, just like we did 5 years ago when we selected, I think it was Black and Beach that we selected. And I just want to emphasize that just because the Texas Water Development Board asked Sarah to do it this way doesn't mean it has to be done that way. It was just a request. And I think with all due respect to Sarah, they're doing us a disservice by asking us for an up and down vote. We do not know who the other members of that technical selection committee were. There were 2,000 employees. We have no idea who they were. We have no idea what their expertise is on this matter. I have no doubt that they're probably very competent individuals, but we deserve the right to know who they are and how they got to that point. What is actually happening is that this small committee made up of 3 of our members and 2 Sarah employees are truly making the decision for all the regional members, because again, all we're being asked to do is an up or down vote. This is very contrary to the open and transparent process that we want to do. The public has no idea what we're doing today. So I'd ask someone to help me with a second to this motion that we just postpone this and allow the 2 entities to come in for an interview.
Mr. Puente, before we proceed with this vote, I would like to just clarify some of the points that you made.
Excuse me, Caitlin. I have a motion that I've addressed the chairman it is his floor for him to see what is next.
This is Mr. Ramos. I sit on the committee and I would agree with Mr. Puente and I'd second his motion.
Thank you, Wood. I think that's very telling that a member of the committee itself is making a second on this item.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, if now is time for additional discussion, or if it's not appropriate, I think we would take your guidance. But if there are comments available, I'd like to make a comment at the appropriate time as well.
Yes, just a moment. I was having technical difficulty, as they say. So a couple of comments, and I want to be respectful of the concerns voiced here, and like a little bit of discussion on it. With regard to the adequacy of the notice, Mr. Puente, are you asserting that the language used on the meeting notice for this agenda item is inadequate?
I think it violates the Open Meetings Act, just like item number 7 did. I would never get away with putting something like this in front of my board, because it gives the decision makers, which is all regional, absolutely no information, including the public, as to what we're going to do. We are being asked to vote on, essentially on Black and Beach. Yes or no, Black and Beach, with no opportunity to know how they got that word, how they got that.
Mr. Puente, with all due respect, was that motion made to vote up or down? Or were you receiving an explanation of the process up to this point and a discussion and presentation of the recommendation of the selection group?
I'm sorry.
I mean, let's be accurate. And I don't want to discount your concerns, but if the purpose of the meeting is to conduct the business of the group, it would seem to me that we need to be able to have the discussion regarding the topic before we have a decision made. I don't know how we would incorporate the decision in the meeting agenda that gets posted in advance of the meeting.
I agree with the need for more discussion, and as a matter of fact, I think Jonathan wanted to speak and further discuss this. I'm not trying to circumvent any discussion on this item.
You asked us to cease discussions.
Well,
when the word Black and Beach was said.
What I should have said, I would like to not take action on this item.
Very fine. Okay.
The lack of the correct way of expressing what I wanted to do.
I understand. Okay. So I appreciate your concerns about the transparency and your perception that it's not sufficiently transparent, and I believe others hold that opinion as well. What I would suggest, though, is that we allow Mr. Flatten to finish his comments regarding the process to date so that we can be informed as to what that process has been. That should afford the membership the opportunity to formulate relevant questions, ask those questions to determine if they can gather the information they want to gather during our meeting, to consider any action, including the postponement of formal action of the selection of a technical consultant. Would you object to that approach?
Mr. Chairman, no, I do not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, and I understand Mr. Stinson wants to make comments. I suspect others do as well. If it's agreeable, we'll let Mr. Flatten complete his comments, then we'll open it to the floor for greater discussion. Mr. Flatten, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that I have stated all that I have, real solid information in terms of the process from my point of view. I know that the administration at the San Antonio River Authority kept copious notes and was in charge of documenting this process with specifics, and I would ask that proper representative at San Antonio River Authority who is proctoring this process to flesh out some of the finer details.
Thank you, Mr. Flatten. Is there a representative from San Antonio River Authority that wants to speak to and the process and provide details about that process?
Melissa, I'd like to invite you to speak on this.
Hello, this is Melissa Bryant. Hopefully you can hear me. So we did have a couple of committee meetings where we went through review of the proposals and we did.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very sorry to interrupt Melissa. Melissa, I'm sorry, but could she identify herself as to who she,
Sure.
A little bit of her background, just where she works.
This is Melissa Bryant. I am the Director of Technical Services here at the River Authority. I have been involved with the Regional Planning probably since like 2005. Also on the selection committee was Aaron Cavazos, who also serves as one of our technical experts here at the River Authority. So back to the selection process, we did go through two intensive processes where we reviewed the proposals that were provided and we scored them as a group. As Charlie did mention, it was a close between the two consultants, and so we did go to interviews, and so we did interview both consultants, and even through that process we did have a unanimous identification of who we would recommend to the group.
Thank you, Ms. Bryant. Could you confirm for me, what was the number of respondents to the solicitation?
There were two.
And you interviewed
both of them.
They were both responsive and met the necessary criteria to be considered.
Yes.
Very fine. Okay. Unless there's any other descriptions of the process up to this point, let's open it to the floor for questions for those involved regarding the process or their recommendation, etc. Mr. Stinson, you want to?
This is Mr. Ramos. Can I make a comment? I'm on the committee, and
yes, sir.
Although the process was, I felt it was adequate for Sarah, I had many questions with regards to the process, and I felt it wasn't adequate for this planning group. Based on past histories that Mr. Winter brought up, there was contention last time, the go-around, when we selected the technical consultant. So when I sat on this committee, I sat there thinking, how can I make a decision on the behalf of 33 of my peers? It does not make sense to me. This is not what I thought I was signing up for. Knowing that this is very important, and I stated that at these meetings, that this is the biggest decision we can make. We need to continue with collaboration amongst ourselves. And I respect what Mr. Puente is saying. And if I was in his shoes, I'd feel the same way. And so I went along with the process. I did everything I did with the best of my abilities. But at the end, I still have some concerns and some questions because, again, this is, even though it's a SARA process, this is not a process that Region L has undertaken. And furthermore, I do not think when this was talked about at the last go round that everybody understood the consequences or what this was going to do. I thought we were going to go back to Region L with maybe 2, maybe 3 possible consultants and let the group decide as we did in the past. And so those are my comments, and that's why I feel the way I feel. And it's important that, again, you know, that this is the biggest decision we're going to make for this planning group. And we need everyone's collaboration, cooperation, and understanding of how we come to this point. So that being said, I'll leave the floor. Thank you.
Just a quick comment. I don't think it's been proposed as a motion, nor I certainly never had the understanding that this group was selecting on behalf of the committee its consultant. Now, to the extent you've decided to make a recommendation of one firm versus another, I can see how people think it's a sort of a Boolean choice here, but I don't know that that's exactly the case. Mr. Stinson, I believe you had comments you wanted to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yeah, just quickly, I would echo the comments really of Mr. Puente and Mr. Ramos. Frankly, at our last board meeting when we discussed the procurement process, I don't think we were fully appreciative of I guess how it was going to be facilitated. And then at the staff work group meeting, I think I found myself and others, frankly, very surprised by zero information being provided related to the process, the applicants, the scoring, or any other methods related to the recommendation. So that was concerning. And then I guess from a historical perspective, you know, I came onto Region L, I think right after we selected the technical consultant last time. So I really do not recall the method utilized. But my understanding from anecdotal evidence and conversations with some of y'all is the past 5 cycles have never been procured in this method. And I guess my question is, you know, if this is new, because I know similar methods were used in the flood planning procurement, that there were differences amongst basins. Frankly, GBRA used an open process and had our applicants present over Zoom in a public forum for the planning group members to hear those proposals and make that decision. What I'm hearing today, I mean, if it's a recommendation of one, the fact that regardless of an NDA, which I think I would have some arguments over the fact that this is pretty much pass-through grants, and the nature of water planning is way different than, say, building a dam or doing some innovative water treatment. I find it concerning that the scoring, the weighting of the scoring has not been provided. Now that I'm hearing that it was very close, that's even more concerning. So I feel like at the appropriate time or the appropriate motion, you know, we just need to pause and see what methods can be afforded to the planning group members to make this decision, is my perspective. And, you know, I apologize that this is the 13th hour when we're talking about this, but we do still have time. It's my understanding for meeting the deadlines as prescribed by the Water Development Board for us to allow ourselves time and due diligence, and frankly, to go back to the boards we represent and let them know that we've had sufficient input or transparency, because most of us are political subdivisions. Frankly, that the state or our governing boards require this of us. And so I'm just shocked on many levels and would just urge caution and pause to allow us to all have a little better understanding of the process and allow at least us to see some of the documents and the backup information before we take a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stinson. Question for the River Authority staff. Is there an opportunity or a mechanism through which members that want to view various records can do so? And if they can do so, are those records presently public information, or will they be made publicly available in the near future?
Hi, this is Xochitl Peña Rodriguez. I'm an attorney for the San Antonio River Authority. So we have been required to use our procurement process by the Texas Water Development Board. That is what we committed to when we signed the contract with them for this. So we have tried to align as much as possible with the requirements of our policies, with the understanding, of course, that it has to go to a public board, and to ensure that we have opportunity for meaningful feedback throughout the process and the decision making. Typically, what happens is that the evaluation committee is given the opportunity to look through the records, do their interviews, ask questions. We felt that it would be more candid and potentially more open. It's handled through this process versus what people are willing to indicate in a more open session. Now, I know that some other groups have done it differently, but there are a number that have gone through this process in the way that we have done it. And like I said, that is considered the best practice for governmental entities to limit the amount of undue influence or lobbying on the behalf of others. With regards to when these documents are considered public records, typically that is after the awarding of a contract. However, I see no problem with making sure that the committee itself has a little more information so that they understand the recommendation. I think we're a little limited in the phone call format with regards to what's been presented in the subcommittee report. So we can certainly entertain requests for information, but typically we do keep information withheld until there is an awarding of a contract.
Even from your board?
That is typically we make sure that the board has the information they need to make a decision that is informed. That doesn't typically mean that you get every single scrap of paper that was submitted.
Are you aware we've received no papers?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the question.
The only backup information this group has been provided is the PowerPoint slide that we're looking at on the screen at the moment, unless someone else has received something that I haven't.
Apologies, I do not actually know what is on the PowerPoint slide that y'all are looking at the moment. I do not believe additional information was provided, and any information that would be provided to all board members.
Okay, so it sounds as though there is an opportunity, at least conceptually, for planning group members to obtain and review some limited documentation associated with the process. That might address, just a moment, that may address concerns that individual members have with regard to evaluating proposals, et cetera. But I think one of the other main points of the issues being raised is the lack of the public's ability, beyond just those of the representatives, the public's ability to review and see those records and information that are being used to formulate decisions. Is there any way to address the public availability of records associated with this procurement process?
So I will also state that every governmental entity or agency does, to a certain degree, delegate the day-to-day operations to staff. We were contracted on to essentially kind of help manage some of this process, and we're required to follow our policies and procedures with regards to procurement.
I understood. And I think I can speak, and certainly on my behalf, we appreciate the help and assistance that Sarah currently provides and has provided in the past. So certainly take none of my comments to mean we're not appreciative of that. But I think there's some valid concerns being raised about the openness and transparency of the process, and concern that any decision made, even if it were to later be discovered, was a decision that would be supported, to do so without that information is problematic, obviously, for some of the members.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I appreciate your patience with us, and I appreciate the fact that you're willing to move the actual selection to another time. But the process is still very important. And what I heard Caitlin say versus what I heard the Sarah attorney, Ms. Rodriguez, Peña Rodriguez say is different. Caitlin said that they were asked by the Texas Water Development Board. The attorney said they're required by the Texas Water Development Board. If they are required, then I'd like to find out as of when were they required, because this is not the way we did it the last time we selected a technical consultant. We did not follow Sarah's internal policies on how to do that. So that's one thing. And frankly, I do not want someone else to decide for me, and I would hope all the Region L members would not want someone else to decide for them as to what is important for them to get. I may want every single scrap of paper that was generated by this solicitation, including the copious notes that Charlie Flatton talked about, to help me make the right decision. And just because some of this work is delegated to staff, and I appreciate Sarah's staff doing that, doesn't mean that we, as the decision makers, as the board, as the appointed regional members, can change that delegation. If we want something different, then we get something different, a different process.
Yes, I agree.
So, Mr. Chair, there were two proposals submitted. I don't know if the committee would just want to see the proposals, since there were only two.
No, I think we want to see everything. I do not want someone else to make the decision for me as to what is important.
This is Steve Graham with the River Authority. I guess I can add a little bit of clarity here. Would sharing the proposals with the committee be a good starting point? Then there could be dialogue on the recommendation from that selection committee. I will say that this was talked about. There is definitely two options. We can do the way we went with a delegated committee, or a public process where anybody, including the consultants and the community, can listen into the deliberation and scoring. And it does create potentially an awkward situation where competing consultants both can listen in on the evaluation and scoring of the teams. But that was sort of dialogued here. But to get us back on track, would starting out just sharing the two proposals with this committee be a good starting point? And then we have another meeting to further dialogue on this topic?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, Steve, you're talking about two different things. One of them, the interview that y'all did that Sarah did as a technical evaluation committee. I can see where there may be, this is not state secrets, that rivals could see what the other one is saying. But what we're talking about is the membership interviewing these companies that have submitted a proposal.
Yes, and of course that can certainly happen, as was mentioned earlier. if you have a quorum of this committee, it is open to the public to attend that meeting. So we could either, we could certainly go, it would be we would lose a couple months to start the process over. I would propose we allow this committee to review the proposals, talk to the selection committee before we decide to re-advertise or start the whole process over. But Sarah is not, we're trying to meet the needs. We're not trying to be driving a process. We're just trying to facilitate getting a firm selected.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
this is Elizabeth McCoy. I put some information in the chat, but I would just like to provide that clarification for those who maybe can't see it, if that would be appropriate.
Please.
Okay, so in the regional water planning contract, the requirement that the planning group needs to meet states the following. It states procurement laws. Contractor must comply with the applicable state of Texas procurement laws, rules, and policies, including but not limited to competitive bidding and the Professional Services Procurement Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 2254, relating to contracting with persons whose services are within the scope of practice of accountants, architects, landscape architects, land surveyors, medical doctors, optometrists, professional engineers, professional geoscientists, real estate appraisers, professional nurses, and certified public accountants. So that information is in the contract. And since the TWDB, we can't provide legal guidance to the planning groups, we also cannot kind of comment on whether or not these processes meet the state procurement law.
Well, that sounds exactly like you're just reciting what the law is, which is very good, which means we do not have to follow what is before us of having 2 Sarah employees who we have no idea who they are, and 3 other members of the planning group, one of them which wants to change this process. So the statement that you were required to do this is not correct. You just have to follow state law, essentially.
Understood. I understand your comment. A quick question for this Sarah staff. Could you explain to me why we'd be facing starting the entire process over if we were to move the, for lack of a better term, the full consideration of all proposals submitted? Why would we have to go back out for solicit proposals, et cetera, if we choose to conduct the evaluation process within the planning group itself? Why would we have to do that?
Zosha, you may need to help me out.
I don't believe we are going back towards the full solicitation, but it would be a redoing of the evaluation process if that is what is preferred. And of course, there is, y'all's meetings are kind of timed on a certain schedule, so that process in and of itself would require additional time.
We can conduct special meetings. That's not prohibited. There's certainly, as you know, notification requirements, but
So we wouldn't have to re-solicit. We could still just have these confirmed, talk to the full committee. Is that what you're saying?
I need to look back at the solicitation and what was posted and what information we gave regarding the process to the vendors themselves to give a full answer, to be frank, because we would be changing the process on the vendors potentially, depending on what was advertised in the solicitation.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'm not asking for a complete redo of whatever with new solicitation, new scoring, anything like that. All I want, and everybody else can speak for themselves, all I want is to see the proposals, to see the scores, and not have to make a decision the very minute that the words Black and Beach came out of somebody's lips. And the public deserves a right also to know who we are going to consider to vote. So if we're given the information that was already developed, the notes that were already developed and made, the proposals that were already submitted. That's all I'm asking for, is more transparency for us to make a good decision and then for the public to know what we're doing. So in my opinion, you do not have to do a brand new solicitation unless, of course, the entire membership wants to give that direction.
Mr. Chairman, this is Ian Taylor at New Braunfels Utilities. I just want to weigh in here, if you don't mind. There's enough concern among the planning group that I wouldn't feel comfortable going forward unless we address these concerns, because I want to make sure that we have the support of the full group before we make this important decision. So it'd be my recommendation that we have take Sarah up on their offer to review the solicitation, just to make sure that there's nothing in the solicitation that would be in conflict with what we're talking about right now. The second thing I would say is that this is professional service, so I don't think they'd be proposals. I think they're actually statements of qualifications, if I'm not mistaken, and we should be selecting engineering firms based on qualifications. So if that's the case, then I would be in favor of having the entire group, giving the entire group access, just as Mr. Puente asked for, to the statements of qualifications and to the evaluation criteria and how they were scored. And then if the group were okay with this next step, I would be interested in bringing this to the next planning group meeting and having those engineer teams on hand in case the planning group has any questions for those engineering teams. Because we're talking about selecting a firm based on qualifications. I have no problem asking those questions in a public meeting and then providing those answers in a public meeting. Anyway, so those are my recommendations, and I just want to put my support behind what we're talking about here.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is Tom Taggart. I would support, what Ian has just gone through, and the concerns that have been raised are substantial. And one additional point I'd like to bring up in relation to, where we're at on this. I mean, the review committee has brought forward a recommendation. I think all we're really asking for is to make sure that we have the information we need to make an informed decision. And I think what Ian's laying out would put us in that position. That's what I think Mr. Puente is asking for. I would also support actually having presentation at the next meeting from both of those proponents after we review those documents. I think that gives the public, an idea of the qualifications that have been brought forward. And I would point out, given the size of the committee we appointed, and I don't know that there was any thought of this, or certainly probably no intent, but I mean, we've got a pretty wide number of interest groups that are represented in this planning group, and certainly, a group of 3 didn't span that full, interest group array that we have as part of this effort. So I think we need more information to make an informed decision on this. I agree this is the most important decision probably we make, short of actually voting on our draft we send forward at the end of the process. But a lot of the quality in that is dependent upon who works on it. This will be an extremely important decision. So I'd support what Ian says and agree that we need to do more work here to be positioned to make an informed decision. I don't feel that with just the recommendation coming forward that puts us in that position.
Mr. Chairman, Matt, if I may, how about I make a motion here, and we'll see if this works. I move, and there's 3 things. I move that we have Sarah review the solicitation to confirm that what we're proposing here is allowed by the solicitation, and therefore we wouldn't have to go back out and advertise. Number 2, all members of the planning group receive the statements of qualifications and any notes or evaluation criteria or how the evaluation turned out. And number 3, that in the next planning group meeting, we put this on the agenda. We invite the engineer teams to be there to provide a brief presentation and be available to answer questions. That's my motion.
Okay. We have a motion. Is there a second?
This is Steve Graham of the River Authority. I second that motion.
I'm sorry, I couldn't. Who made the second?
Steve Graham, San Antonio River Authority. I second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Is there any additional discussion on the motion?
Excuse me, sir. This is Allison Elder. I'm the Director of Legal Services at the River Authority, and I just want to raise a point of order. I believe that Mr. Fuentes' original motion was seconded, and it's first in line. So I would recommend that you take these motions in the order that they were presented to the body.
Mr. Chairman, I withdraw my motion.
Thank you, Mr. Puente. With that motion withdrawn, we have the current motion made by Mr. Taylor, seconded by Mr. Graham. Is there any additional discussion on the motion? Okay. Being there's no additional discussion, we'll adopt the motion by consensus unless there's an objection raised. We'll consider the motion passed. Before we leave this agenda item, I think it might be worthwhile, or perhaps we'll take it up at one of the other agenda items regarding the scheduling of the meeting at which we next consider this topic. Is there a requirement with regard that's placed upon us based on the schedule for developing the regional plan that we call a special meeting prior to our next regularly scheduled quarterly meeting to take this matter up?
We can call a special meeting. We just need to have at least 2 weeks notice to provide the public notice that this special meeting is happening.
Well, okay, thank you. I guess my question is, does the schedule, if we postpone the next consideration to our next regularly scheduled meeting, does that create issues with the planning process? My preference would be to postpone it till the next regular meeting, affording membership and anyone else who cares to review these records the opportunity to do so, and then bring the matter up at the regular meeting.
According to
Tim. Oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead, Emily.
Okay, so this is Elizabeth McCoy with the board. I will just kind of let you know that we are planning to provide the planning groups with some information to kind of start working on the projections process in December of this year. So that is when we will be kind of providing, I believe, the next thing for you guys to start working on related to kind of the planning schedule.
Right, and if I recall correctly, during the chair's conference call, one of the comments made was we are going to have a shortened time frame under which to consider demand projections. So timely consideration of those projections is important, correct?
That's correct. But we will be kind of releasing that information in December.
I understand. Our next regular meeting would be scheduled in November. Is that correct, Caitlin?
Yes, that is correct.
Through November 4th.
Very good. So unless there's any objection to doing so, we will place an agenda item on the meeting for the November meeting. We'll provide opportunity for the members to review the language of that agenda item prior to posting the meeting notice so that it's considered adequate by all parties to properly inform the public of the consideration to be undertaken by the group. Does anyone object to that process, part of the process? Okay. Is there any other discussion regarding this matter? Very good. With that, we'll move on to agenda item 9. Schedule and potential agenda items for the next meeting. We've identified one, of course. Do the members have any topics they wish to request to be on the next agenda, other than the one we've just discussed, of course?
Yeah, this is Adam Yablonsky. I had a discussion with Mr. Byram about, well, currently I'm the region liaison to Region J, and I had a discussion with Mr. Byram about swapping out for me in that position. I think he'd be a better fit. And as you may recall, Khan was the Region J liaison prior to me. So I was just asking for that as an agenda item.
Thank you, Adam. We'll be sure to place an agenda item on there so that we can consider, appointment of the liaisons, et cetera.
We also have that request for the specific language for the vacancies that we still have for counties and electric industry utilities. So we will add that with as specific and open language as possible.
Okay.
Tim, this is Diane, and I think you mentioned that we had a resignation in Mr. Singleman, and I wondered what category that was in.
Mr. Singleman, of course, either served under ground, I don't know, I don't have it before me, just a moment.
I believe it was water districts.
At least on the website, he's identified under water districts.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, suggestions? There being none, we'll move to agenda item 10, second opportunity for public comment. Is there anyone present on the meeting that would like to make oral comments at this point? Okay. Have we received any additional online submitted comments since the beginning of the meeting?
No, sir, we have not.
Okay, very fine. Unless there's any other discussion related to the agenda items on the meeting notice, we'll adjourn the meeting. Any objection to adjourning the meeting at this point? Very fine. We stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.